bitter things are often better paired with something that's sweet. Uh, if I'm gonna say this phrase, if you know Mary Poppins, what was Mary Poppins's phrase? There, there you go. Y'all know it's a spoonful of sugar helps the medicine go down. I'll even say this last week, Elliot has had this cough and the doctor prescribed some cough medicine. So he's been taking cough medicine and anyways, the stuff tastes awful, just flat awful, but it wasn't working. And so I'd found on TikTok this recipe to make cough medicine, don't judge me, that used onion and honey. I know some of you are just like, you chop up an onion, you pour honey in it, and you let it sit for like a day, and the stuff works. I don't know how it did it, but it did it anyways. But I remember taking a bite of it myself, and I'm like, onion, like I don't mind onion, but you get onion breath, and it just like goes through your whole body. That poor kid had onion all through his body, but the way he would take it was because it was sweet. It had that honey taste to it, so it was like, hey, like it's not great. I'll swallow, I'll tolerate it, but to make it even better, we mixed it with a little apple juice and you made it a little sweeter. And then it's like, well, give me that stuff. I'll drink it because it's so sweet now that the bitterness of the onion has kind of dissipated. It's kind of gone. And so I realized that in life, when we want a spoonful of sugar to go with our medicine, because it helps us take the bitter parts with the good stuff, right? But is it also true, and I'm just going to ask this, that maybe there are bitter points of life that we need something a little sweet to go with it? That maybe life itself has some bitterness, and we could all think about moments when maybe we experienced loss, we experienced hurt, we experienced pain, we experienced any of the emotions that really just would want us to draw in and be by ourselves. The experience, the moments where we don't really want to engage with other people. And the only way that we can maybe survive those moments is by finding something that's a little sweet in those times. When I look at the story of Ruth, and that's where our text is going to be today, I think that this idea of bitterness really sits with the first chapter of Ruth. And we're going to focus on Ruth chapter 1, verses 1 through 18. We're beginning now a 5-week sermon series in the book of Ruth. So if you have not read the book of Ruth, I would encourage you to you've got 5 weeks to read it. Go ahead and read it. It's an easy book to read, but it's a great story of God's faithfulness to his people and to his plan. So that's kind of the overarching theme. But as we look at Ruth chapter 1, it starts in the most bitter of places. Normally I like a story to start good. We want to have everything start off right, like a fairy tale. We want it to start off with, Frodo in the village and everything's going great. We like good stories. Ruth does not start that way. I'm going to break it. If you don't know Ruth, Ruth starts off in the pits of life. So we'll start with verse 1 of Ruth chapter 1. In the days when the judges ruled, there was a famine in the land. Well, that starts off great, don't it? Basically, we're going to start off verse 1 and we're going to tell everybody that people are starving. There is no food, or there is a lack of food for people. Now, we currently don't have a problem with famine. Grocery bills may be going up, but famine has yet to strike us like it would strike them. Chances are, if the United States experience a famine, which we're kind of economically, we're into one, I think crop-wise, they say we're entering into one, we can engineer the production of more food. They didn't have that then. If God didn't send rain, they didn't have food. And if anything happened to the produce of a season that was gone, they didn't have it. So we're introduced in verse 1, there was a famine in the land. So a man from Bethlehem in Judah, together with his wife and 2 sons, went to live for a while in the country of Moab. The man's name was Elimelech. Sorry, I can't really talk at the moment. His wife's name was Naomi, and the names of his 2 sons were Mahlon and Chilion. They were Ephrathites from Bethlehem, Judah, and they went to Moab and they lived there. Now Elimelech, Naomi's husband, died, and she was left with her two sons. They married Moabite women, one named Orpah, the other Ruth. After they had lived there about 10 years, both Mahlon and Chilion also died, and Naomi was left without her two sons and her husbands. What a way to start a novel, right? Isn't that the perfect place that, if you're going to write a story, is that not the perfect place to start? We have this woman who I'm just going to say Ruth was probably beautiful, or not Ruth, Naomi was probably beautiful. We won't say that. If we were to describe her, that's what we're going to say. And all of a sudden, we're introduced to that she is living in a time period where there is no food, and her husband decides, hey, this is probably going to make sense for us to leave God's promised land to some sort of a pagan land. Was God part of that decision? Do you think God told them, hey, you need to leave Bethlehem? What family do you think they had in Moab? What family did they have in Bethlehem? Well, if I look just at our church here, a majority of you have family in the local area. A good majority of you do. Matter of fact, it's kind of weird sometimes when you start thinking about this church and the social dynamics that crisscross. And you know what I'm talking. When you start talking about who's related to who here, it gets to be a little twisted. There's a reason it's Kentucky, okay? I know. That was a low one. That was a low one. Yeah, there we go. There we go. But we start looking, and I want you to imagine that Bethlehem's not much different than we are. People are related. Your family didn't marry and move off cross country. If you got married, you stayed with family. You had children in the family, and everything. It was an agrarian society. So everything was dependent upon grandma being there to help take care of kids, so that mama could help take care of the household, so that all the kids could run and play together. It was entirely built around this idea that people are going to be close to one another, dear to one another. So what was it like this day when Elimelech and Naomi decided that they were going to leave, to go to a place where there was no family, there were no friends, and hope to survive? They load their stuff on the back of a donkey, they go, and then, by the way, we get there and they're there for at least 10 years, because at this point, Naomi's husband and her two sons have all died, and that's the first 5 verses of the book. I can't imagine losing a spouse. But I've heard that losing a child is worse. Naomi has lost it all. At this point, Naomi doesn't have anything in Moab. She's got 2 daughters-in-laws. But why stay? What's the point? Her family is all back in Bethlehem. She has property probably in Bethlehem. Everything about who she is as a follower of God is in Bethlehem. So she says, what am I going to do? So she leaves. She starts to go back. And as she's on her journey, she comes to the realization that she's got these 2 girls following her. I mean, they're now her daughters. She kind of adopted them when they married into the family. She welcomed them. I imagine she probably taught them what it was like to be a wife. She probably helped them on their journey to be good wives and to have this idea of what her future family would be like, what her grandchildren would look like as they were going to play. She probably dreamed of those things and probably spoke to Ruth and Orpah about these things and have all that robbed from her. So Naomi says, this is verse 8. Naomi turns to the two daughters-in-law and she says, go back, each of you, to your mother's home. May the Lord show you kindness as you have shown kindness to your dead husbands and to me. May the Lord grant that each of you will find rest in the home of another husband. As I look at this verse, why did she send them back? Why was she so insistent that they need to go back? And oh, by the way, there's this from the following verses, it's a series of her tears, her crying. They're all crying at this point. You put three women together and they're talking about parting. Of course, there's going to be tears. They are sobbing over each other. And you move now to verse 15. Orpah has left. And Naomi looks to Ruth and she says, your sister-in-law is going back to her people and her gods. Go back with her. And so as I see Ruth in this process now, as I look at Naomi, Naomi is doing what I think I and many others are really good at doing. She is pushing everyone away. Now, there's part of her that could be looking and saying, you know what? It's not right for these girls to follow me back. They need to stay here with their family. What have I got for them? I've got nothing for them. It's good for them to stay with their family. There could be a part of this that's logical. But how many of us want people around when we're hurting? How many of us want people around when we're in the middle of pain? I've been to many hospital rooms, and typically it goes like this. If people are generally comfortable and they're in a good frame of mind, they want to visit. They want to talk. Hey, preach, come in, have a seat. Let's chit chat for a little bit. They love it. And then after a few minutes, they're always like, okay, well, I'm tired. I got to go pee. And everything knows that this whole gown is inappropriate. So we need you to leave. It's kind of how the conversation goes. If you walk in, though, and the person's in pain, they're uncomfortable, the visit's always very short because they don't want you right. They don't want you there. They're uncomfortable. That they want to be left alone. I think for your own selves, when you're sick, do you want someone right there beside you, fanning you and saying, how can I help you? What can I do for you? Well, that might sound good at sometimes, but oftentimes we want to be completely alone in those times. We want to be left by ourselves. And I think Naomi's in that same position. But what I notice is what Ruth says, and this is the famous verse in Ruth chapter 1. And this is where I see that connection will dissolve life's disappointments. Okay? Connection is going to dissolve life's disappointments. Notice verse 16. Ruth replies, don't urge me to leave you or to turn back. Where you go, I will go. Where you stay, I will stay. Your people will become my people, your God, my God. And where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. And may the Lord, may my vow be that he deal with me so severely if anything but death separates us. So Naomi realized that Ruth's going to stick around. She can't get rid of her. She can't shove her away. She can't push her away. So she says, okay, come on, girl, let's go. And I look at that moment with Ruth and I realize that the connection that Ruth creates to Naomi is the only connection to dissolve life's disappointments, to dissolve life's bitterness. You see, I think we all experience moments in life's bitterness. It's times when we don't want to be with other people. We want to be left alone. We want to sit and we want to realize, we want to grovel in our pain, if you will. And so I know that is happening with Naomi. And notice what Ruth does. I'm not leaving. You need me right now, the same as I need you. I look at that moment and I would ask you this. How many times has someone stood with you when you needed them, but you didn't want it? The times when you didn't really want someone right there, and maybe they said, no, I'm going to be here because right now you need me here. I might just be in the other room. I might be just waiting. I might be a phone call away, but I'm going to be present for you because right now you need me. I think that happens more often in our lives than we like to realize. What about God? Do you think God ever plays that role? Where God says, I know you need me, but I'm going to be right here waiting. I'm going to wait for you, but I'm going to be right here waiting. Ruth does this in such a beautiful way that I think of Proverbs chapter 17 and verse 7, where it says that a friend loves at all times, and a brother is born for a time of adversity. A friend loves at all times. Just for yourself, do you have a friend who loves you through the worst of times? A friend who's been there, it doesn't matter what, but they're the one who has stood by your side through some of the worst times in your life. And they say, I'm going to be here for you. I don't know how I can be here. I don't know what I can do for you. I don't know, but I'm not going to leave. A friend is born for a time of adversity. That's what we have friends for. This idea of connection so that we can endure the bitter points of life. Deuteronomy chapter 31, verse 6, God says, or Moses writes, be strong and courageous. Don't be afraid or terrified because of them. For the Lord your God does what? What does the Lord your God do? Goes with you. You're not alone. How come? What's the rest of that verse? He will never leave you nor forsake you. Boy, there are some times in life when I have wanted to be alone and I say, I just need a moment by myself. And those times are always great. I always enjoy those times for a minute because then what happens? I start to realize how foolish I can be. When you leave Josh Watkins alone with his mind, it gets scary and it gets scary quick. If I were to have someone else there to help me bounce ideas off of, or even just someone there who's going to sit there and keep their yap shut, I all of a sudden feel better. And that's the story of Job. If you know the book of Job, that's what happened in Job's life. Job had a couple of friends show up. They sat there, and for 7 days, they were great friends. You know why? They sat there. They kept their yap shut. Then they opened them, and they were foolish. Sometimes we need people just to be there. But we also have to realize that God is always there. He will never leave you nor forsake you. Oh, there is a world of people today who would ask the question, where is God in my pain? I was on TikTok just the other day, and this was a common theme among videos that I came across, was this reality of people who are saying, prove to me there's a God. And typically the question goes like this: how in the world can there be evil and an all good God? If God really is good, then there can't be evil in the world. And there is a host of people who would say, wait a second, God's not real. He can't be real because there is so much pain in the world. What does this verse tell us? It doesn't matter how much fear you have. It doesn't matter how much pain you have. He will never leave you nor forsake you. Psalm 118, verse 5. When hard pressed, I cried to the Lord. He brought me into a spacious place. The Lord is with me. I won't be afraid. What can mere mortals do to me? What can any person do to me? when God is with me. You see, we as Christians, people who have a Christian worldview, who live with the Spirit inside of us, should we ever experience moments of isolation, moments of true loneliness, if the Spirit is dwelling within us? We see Jesus. How often did Jesus separate himself from people? Jesus would go up on a mountain and he'd pray. How many times did he separate himself from people and find himself away from others? But in the times he was away from others, was he really lonely? Oh, he'd go away. And what would happen to Jesus? He'd be away from everybody else. And what did he do? Our Father who is in heaven, let this cup pass from me, but not my will, your will be done. He would pray. I realize that we as a church oftentimes experience isolation because we want to experience it, because we've pushed everybody else away, and maybe sometimes we've even pushed God away. Naomi's pushing people away from her. We're going to get to this next week, but Naomi returns to Bethlehem and she is in a bitter state. She's pushed everybody away, including God. But here's what Christians should do. In the moments that life is bitter, in the moments when this world hurts, when there is pain and there is sorrow, Christians should be the one people who rely on each other and rely on our God. You see, that's what I notice in this story as we continue on with Ruth, is that there is a culture of isolation in our world today. Lyle brought up COVID, absolutely atrocious when it came to mental health. If you were to go to Google right now, and you could do it while I'm talking, I don't care. Fact check me. If you go to Google and you type in mental health, isolation, COVID, and that's all you enter, you're going to get page after page of results of people who have scientifically studied this topic. One of them said this: individuals who report feeling lonely are more likely to experience dementia, heart disease, and stroke. Feeling lonely, this is from PBS. Feeling lonely is like smoking 15 cigarettes a day in terms of its impact on life. I'm not a chain smoker. I might kind of sound like I am one right now. I'm not one. 15 cigarettes a day. That's about 2 pack, if I'm not mistaken. That's a, huh? Is that 3/4 of a pack? I'm a little off at my counting. I must buy a different one. Okay. Well, I don't know how to move on from that one. That's a good one. Let me get back to my notes for a second. Okay, there we go. 15 cigarettes a day. There ain't a one of us here who would say, man, that's going to be actually healthy for me. Boy, that's gonna help me become stronger. That's gonna help me become better. Most of us would agree. Smoking 15 cigarettes a day is somehow gonna limit me. Somehow it's gonna hurt. It might be an addiction. It might be something that I struggle with. It might be something that I even enjoy a little bit. But we're gonna know that's not gonna be good for my lungs. We understand that. We grasp that concept. And here in all of the studies we can find, isolation is killing people. And by the way, this was not just a survey that was done in COVID. From the 1970s, where there's been this noticeable increase in isolation in the American culture. Think about what happened, though. We stopped building front porches and we started building backyards. Oh, by the way, I like a good privacy fence around my backyard because I don't want anyone to see me when I'm sitting back there. I want to make sure that I'm completely separated. And oh, by the way, my generation doesn't even like to ring doorbells. We're going to call you or text you before we show up so that you can be prepared for it. How come? We don't want to be surprised. We don't want people coming around. And if we're going to want people around, we want to be emotionally prepared for it. It's the millennial problem, I suppose, where we're saying, well, look, I'm going to go out only for a little bit, but I want to be able to drive myself home from any engagement because when I'm done, I want to be isolated. That's 34 to 25-year-olds. What's the next generation going to do? Naomi's pushed everybody away. But God tells us It's not good for man to be alone. It's not good for us to be isolated. So if it's not good for us to be isolated, what are we going to do as a church? If it's not good for us to be isolated, but we realize that many of us are isolated, what are we going to do as a church? How do we solve the problem? Well, I'm just going to throw out a rough number here. I'm making this up. But there's probably half of you here today who live in isolation. Think of how many of our older individuals, maybe they live at a home by themselves. How many of them get checked on regularly? Oh, if you want real proof of this, go down to the nursing home. Last time I was in a nursing home, I walked past the nurse's desk. A lady was in the wheelchair. She was telling the nurse that she was waiting for her granddaughter, who is the only person out of her entire family that comes to see her. And she comes once every 2 weeks. But she knew she was coming that day. How many of us are even younger individuals, maybe even younger than me, who live a life entirely isolated from anybody else? The only social connection we get is through a television with a game that is connecting us to somebody else, and that we're going to talk to them through a screen. We're not going to see them. We're not going to experience them. The only thing we're going to talk about is what we're doing on that game. You can't tell me it's an old people problem, and you can't tell me it's just a young people problem. It's a world problem. So what are we going to do, church? That's the question. So here's the challenge for us. Naomi pushed people away, but Ruth did what? She stayed. Naomi was pushing away, and Ruth said, I'm not going. So I want you to look at verse 16 and 17 again of Ruth's comment. I want you to look at verse 16 and 17. I want you to read that to yourself in your head. And while you're reading that verse, I want you to think of a person who needs to hear this. And if you got your phone, I want you to text that person right now. If you don't have your phone, you're like, Josh, I didn't bring my phone. It's on, it's off, it's silent, it's whatever. I don't care. I want you to write down in your head on a piece of paper in your bulletin. I want you to write down a name of somebody who you're going to say, look, I'm going to connect to this person. One person, that's all I'm asking for. I'm not asking for you to try and knock at every door in your neighborhood. I'm asking you to think of one person who, when you read this, says, you know what? They need someone to love them. They need someone who's going to stand right beside them. And I want you to make it this week's homework that you're going to do that. So as I read this again, this is 16 and 17, I want you to think about that person. Oh, I'm in Deuteronomy. That's no wonder it's wrong. 16, 17. Don't urge me to leave you or to turn back from you. Where you go, I will go. Where you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people. Your God, my God. Where you die, I will die. And there I'll be buried. Now here's the real question. We all have a person in our mind. We have a person that we're going to reach out to, we're going to connect to, and we're going to make it our goal this week that that person does not experience loneliness. If we got to sit at their house for an hour and talk, we're going to do it, and we're going to be happy to do it. You know why? Because y'all are some of the most giving people. Last week, you gave abundantly. And I have a feeling that you know the problems that people are dealing with far better than I do. You know people who struggle. So talk to them. But what if we read verse 16 and 17 as if we were reading it to God? Don't urge me to leave you, God. Where you go, God, I'm going to go. Where you stay, I'm going to stay. And God, the people that you've chosen to be your people, they're going to be my people. Your sons and daughters are going to be my brothers and sisters. And God, if anything but death separates me from you, I couldn't have it. Matter of fact, I want death to bring us together. You see, I realize that connecting to other people and connecting to God will dissolve the bitterness in this life. There are times when we're in pain, and there is no reason for any person in this congregation to feel loneliness. No reason for it. You know why? Y'all are good people. Another reason, you love each other. I know it. Y'all are so good about it. I don't even know if I have to say a lot of this stuff, but there is going to be a reminder because of how good you are about loving people. But I want you to think about what this does to our community, not just this church community. What does this do to Okolona, to Highview, Hillview? What does this do to our community? What does this do to Louisville? Can you imagine what your neighbors would think if they saw all these cars at your house and they're like, what's going on? You having a party, a cookout? And they're like, no, my church is just here to check on me because they know I've kind of been alone for a little bit and they're here to check on me. Can you imagine what the community would see if they saw all of us doing stuff like that? Can you imagine? Just picture with me for a moment the power that would say to a world who says there is no God. When we say our God's telling us to do this, to love people unconditionally, to support people, to embrace one another, and to stand with one another. What does our world think when they would see that? How in the world can we ever question there being a God whenever our people truly love like Naomi, like Ruth loved Naomi? If I look to you and I said, may nothing in this life separate us except for death. And I'm going to walk with you through hell and back if that's what it takes. But I'm going to walk with you. And we're going to go arm in arm with the Savior. And if we told that to each other and the world was to hear that, what do you think they would think of this church? Either A, we're a whole bunch of crazies, which might be true, or they would say, you know what, those people have got it. And they will be known by their love for one another. That's the prayer of Jesus. Is that the disciples would be known by their love for one another. That's all Ruth did for Naomi, is she loved Naomi deeply, intently. Let's have a prayer. And after this prayer, the invitation will be open. Jim will lead us in a song. Let's pray. Father, we come to you knowing full well that loneliness does not exist within the church. Well, it shouldn't, at least. There are times that we've pushed people away. We've pushed those who should be close to us away. We have isolated ourselves. Satan is really good at telling us that that's what we need. So, Father, in those lies that he has told, may your Spirit fill us with truth. Father, may we embrace one another in ways that we haven't done in a long time. May we be known as a place that loves you because we love each other so intently. Father, I have a feeling that some of us have pushed you away, that in the need for isolation, we've even separated ourselves from you. Help us to know that you've never left, that you've always been right there. And in this moment, for those who have pushed you away, Father, like the father of the prodigal son, run back to us and grab us and hold us and call us your children again. Remind us of the love that you have for us. And may we be people like Ruth who cling to other people, loving them. This we ask in the name of Jesus. Amen.